Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. Yeah, it's Wednesday, the 27th of December, 2023. You've got the 2-7 in there. Sacred Gematria numbers. My birthday's in 2 days. I'm 1229, which is the 201st prime. I don't know why I keep mentioning that. I'm going to go off of my social media like I usually do for anyone that's new or unfamiliar with how I do things. This is not a friggin' professional channel. I am an international security analyst, ex-special forces, ex-infantry officer. I did that for 15 years, and then I incorporated and created my own business that I am CEO and friggin' whatever you want to call it, president, secretary, everything of Athena Incorporated. I have business cards and stuff like that, but I was doing contracts with the highest levels of government since even releasing from the military, and I was quite busy doing quite a few contracts. And since the pandemic, unfortunately, people within my group, especially in Ottawa, Canada, which is the capital, a large majority of people here are really into the woke Justin Trudeau narrative, WEF narrative, whatever you want to call it, and others obviously involved in that as well, because this has been hundreds of years in the making, not just in the last 8 years. But I just wanted to share some more stuff. I talk about conspiracies, and I would say that they're not theories, because once something is proven and debunked, all right, that it's no longer a theory, it's actually just a conspiracy, right? And so let's be clear on that. And so I'm a conspiracy analyst, and I'm not biased when I look at different things. So even with chemtrails and contrails, I've talked about this a lot, and there's still a lot of proof coming out more and more about people within, like, even commercial and or private companies and military, even in North America. And I've showed the treaties as well between US and Canada for literally for that. And people are asking for access to information requests and asking for what chemicals they're using, the quantities they're using, how much they're dispersing on the public, and why, and then the long-term impacts of that. And so it's coming out more and more. And when information starts to come out that where there's criminality, there tends to be really big events that happen internationally that try to distract us. So even when I'm on YouTube, I got to remember. So even when VAERS came out, that were official documents that were actually from the manufacturers, not even all of them, but from even like one specific one of the major ones for the pandemic. Look at the VAERS, and that were submitted and released in February 2021, and even March of 2022, and around that time, there was a war declared between Russia and Ukraine that was pushed because of people inciting emotional responses in people and lying about crimes against humanity that were committed that turned out to be completely false. And myself, I was the only one in Canada, or one of the only ones in Canada, that was sharing this truth and these facts. And even Seymour Hersh, who has been for decades now world renowned for being the best security analyst, like he was saying the same stuff that I was saying, even though we were completely different parallel areas, you know what I mean? Not talking to each other, but just getting to the same conclusion based off of our own data. So even a lot of like these documentaries and these docuseries that have come out recently, this is all stuff that do your own research and go down your own rabbit holes, or whatever you want to call it, so to speak, and do all the research for yourself too, okay? And verify. If things are confusing to you or whatever, or unclear, verify. Go on a VPN, okay, a protected browser, and one that's not censored, okay? Because ladies and gentlemen, everywhere, all over the friggin' world, like, we are censored to varying degrees. So even connecting your browsers to different countries will even show, and it'll preview just how censored Canada is. And that's a way to get, and that's a way to access the news too, by the way, is if you just get a VPN, because I even have one on my phone. And it's because of my work. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just responding to someone that is also a friggin', I say also, he's a friggin' genius. And we're going to meet up, not to do a podcast, or I don't know. but maybe record conversations. But we're going to talk in person for the first time soon because it's due. And we're going to do some brainstorming of some ideas that we've had and rabbit holes that we've gone through. And so more to follow on that. I would also really love to talk with Whitney Webb. I'm going to be sharing some of her stuff as well. And she would be like, I'm the Canadian version. And she's the American version of me because I'm doing this for a friggin' long time. Since at least 2001. So yeah, I'm in my 40s, ladies and gentlemen. And on the ground, you know, and with my skill sets and experiences and stuff like that, and where I've gone and what I've done, it would be interesting to talk to her because I think that we could probably sit down for a friggin' week minimum and just hash out what we know, where we got it from, what we think, future projections based on past. Like, I just think it would be such a fucking solid conversation. And I would love to do a podcast. I would do a podcast, but like there's a lot of stuff that we would probably have to talk about and clarify before getting to that level, because a lot of the stuff that we know, or I'm assuming that she knows because it's, again, like she is like really informed, is stuff that even on Rumble, like you just, there's no point in discussing or sharing stuff on Rumble yet, especially. And that even on Rumble would get you censored. And so there's just literally no point. But stuff I would love to talk to her in person about. And so even the White Rabbit podcast, looking at doing an interview with him, and he's American as well, and he also knows what's up a lot more than a lot of freaking people. And so like take a look at his work as well. And if this podcast lines up, then obviously I'm going to be sharing that video to people. And then if you like his work, then hopefully that, like, again, gains traction and gets him a lot of viewers and followers, and yeah. Sorry, I just got to respond to someone else. Ex Air Force, all this stuff, officer and stuff like that, and does not believe that contrails or chemtrails are a thing. Literally just said I'm wrong. There are literal treaties in place. I'll just do a live. Hey, so if you do an access for information and ask about the chemicals and materials that are being used by the Canadian Armed Forces and or commercial or some private companies that are working with us as well, then ask for the monthly amounts that they're using and how much or what the quantities that they're dispersing in the atmosphere, and then look at the treaties between the U.S. and Canada for this as well. And I've shared it with I can't say the name right now, but I've shared it before, so I'll just have to take a look at my data, because again, this has been like over a year, and then I'll send it to you today or tomorrow. But these are facts, and people that have actually worked within these organizations up close and personal have been whistleblowing about this for decades now. So this is actually a fact, and you are unfortunately wrong in this case. But it'd be interesting if you look more into it, though. Sorry, it's because like people like come at me and I get annoyed with it, right? So like even on YouTube, Graham Hancock was talking about like the Earth not being flat and stuff like that, and I don't care what your thoughts are on that. I've done like decades worth of research, scientific experimentations, explorations, proving things on my own. Actually getting into the books as well, looking at archive data, even from these actual institutions that are pushing the narrative. And I also corrected yet again ChatGPT, and I will also prove that. So like I get people like literally, and they don't even say anything useful, right? So like I had said that, you know, like that Graham Hancock unfortunately lost credibility with that interview that he did, and people are just like, you don't have any credibility. Where's your credibility? Like, why don't you look at my freaking channel, do a second search, or even literally just click on my profile from the comment. Literally, it's just one click, and then you have access to my content, and you have access to my references and stuff like that I actually share in site as well. But people, again, nowadays are just they're just zoned out. They're just tuned out. So Chat GPT, like I was going over again, explaining how you'd get like the different measurements for the curvature and stuff like that, and was giving me completely incorrect mathematics and stuff like that, and like breaking those all down and stuff like that. And so I had to like ask him questions like, what is this? What is this? Break it down. And then he had to tell me like, I had to admit, where the frig is this chat? Did they delete it on me? But anyways, I took a photo of it. They friggin', I think they deleted it. Oh yeah, sorry. I appreciate your diligence in seeking clarification. There seems to be an error in my previous responses, and I apologize for any confusion. Let's correct the calculation. Because I was even like, and this is me, you know, asking questions, and then I'm like, you know, going over the friggin' math, all of this stuff. And the formula is 8 inches per squared mile. And then I give the examples. And anyway, so trying to tell me that like completely incorrect and multiple different answers, by the way, for like where there would be like the curve beyond the in this example would be on the like sea level for the imaginary ship I was talking about. So yeah, and even at the bottom of Chat GPT, it says Chat GPT can make mistakes. Consider checking important information. So for people that are using Chat GPT, it has also not been updated since January of 2022. And if I can prove it wrong consistently, because I've shared this information before as well, and like even mathematics. Okay, so for a friggin' human, by the way, how impressive is that? Like, I was so impressed with myself yesterday over that. Like, again, but for a human to be able to correct a friggin' computer and AI, Chat GPT on math, you tell me who else has done that so far, because I have not heard that yet. I have not heard anyone do that yet. I'm sure my brother could probably do it, or his friggin' one of his sons or daughters. But have they tried or have they done it? No. But I did, and I just proved this to you as well. And so yeah, like I'm really sick of trolls like online that literally don't attack my work. They attack or my content, but they attack me on a regular basis, and are just like, you're wrong, and then leave it. Cool. Thanks for that. That what am I supposed to do with that? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? I made homemade bread yesterday, by the way. And it was delicious, and I'm really freaking proud of myself. So if the freaking zombie apocalypse comes, I will know how to make bread from scratch. I'm just going through my math here. Or sorry, my social media here. So more updates from yesterday. CIA accused of hiding records that analysts took monetary incentives to bury COVID lab leak findings. So an offshoot of the Conservative Heritage Foundation is suing the Central Intelligence Agency, accusing it of withholding records detailing payoffs to analysts to bury findings that a lab leak was the most likely explanation for the COVID-19 pandemic. And so our equivalent of that would be like our CSIS, our CSEC, our global affairs, people that I've trained at the highest levels to respond to natural and man-made disasters. And a lot of them were lying, even cabinet members on the record, and Bill Blair, the Minister of National Defense, stuff like that, because they were paid to and bribed and bought, okay? While people like me lost my friggin' contracts, lost my friggin' money because I couldn't be bought and blackmailed and friggin' bribed. And that's why I also like to try to warn people from these organizations as well, especially people that travel internationally, is that you also have to be aware of things like honeypots and people trying to exploit situations where there'll be alcohol, there'll be drugs, there'll be underage children, you know what I mean, and or male, female, adult escorts and stuff like that too, for like married people, you know, and this is all it's by design. And even Yuri Bezmenov in the 70s was freaking talking about this. So like, come on, people, when are you gonna wake up? Not people watching this channel, I'm just saying, like, in general, when are people gonna wake up with this stuff? It's so annoying, and people just like push it out. No, I don't want to hear it. Oh yeah, more interesting facts is that during Prohibition, This was more in North America, especially the US, but this is when alcohol was prohibited. Fun fact is that things like moonshine and alcohol, well, moonshine is alcohol, but like even the harder alcohol, this was being used as a fuel for vehicles. So even like the Model T40 and other vehicles, they were run more effectively on alcohol, and it was cheaper, and it was during a time, the reason why there was prohibition, because petroleum, by the way, which is the second most abundant fluid in the world, and it's not, there's no chance of it being friggin' overused and stuff like that. Like there's so many myths with that as well. And I've shared the proof on that. But so there was a time where it was being limited because this was the push to try to like dupe people into like the 40s and 50s, dupe people into believing that the scarcity of resources and like and fear being something that, again, like being, and I'll share this in my video, being used to control people. And because of that, people made alternate solutions to not having petroleum for their vehicles. And so they made vehicles with larger carburetors, or whatever you want to call it. And they started using alcohol. And then they're like, nope, alcohol is now prohibited. And that's why even the Dukes of Hazzard, their vehicle, fun fact, I watched all the friggin' episodes. I know the friggin' song off by heart, like the theme song and stuff like that, because I watched all this stuff growing up, and Bonanza and all that stuff as well. But yeah, their vehicles run on moonshine. And these are all in plain sight, trying to share information with us that we wouldn't necessarily get by mainstream media. And I will show you why. Well, I will attempt to show you a little bit as to why. I'm already like 16 minutes in, and I haven't even talked to you about Santa Claus and the magic mushrooms yet. So yeah, I'll do that one first for anyone that's only on here to check this stuff out. This is from Eric Dubé, and I don't care what people think about him, and they want to say whatever they want to say, like controlled opposition, CIA, all of whatever. I don't care.
And place presence
is verifiably like the best, like up there of like the top 5, definitely top 5, like the best content providers on YouTube, bar none. So and verifying his work and videos and stuff like that, and not agreeing with everything, obviously, because again, that would be boring anyway, and we have different life experiences. And but even this video is incredibly interesting.
Underneath them.
And facts.
James Arthur wrote,
a lot of facts.
So why do people bring pine trees into their houses at the winter solstice, placing brightly colored red and white packages under their boughs as gifts to show their love for each other and as representations of the love of God and the gift of his son's life? It is because underneath the pine bough is the exact location where one would find this most sacred substance, the Amanita muscaria, in the wild. The Amanita muscaria is the red and white magic mushroom that grows almost exclusively beneath pine trees. Their main psychoactive ingredient is muscimol, as well as trace amounts of DMT, an entheogen naturally produced in the brain's pineal gland. The pine cone-shaped pineal gland is an organ that produces the same DMT found in this pine tree fungus, and much more. Dr. Rick Strassman wrote, DMT exists in all of our bodies and occurs throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. It is part of the normal makeup of humans and other mammals, marine animals, grasses and peas, toads and frogs, mushrooms and molds and barks, flowers and roots. DMT is in this flower here, in that tree over there, and in yonder animal. It is most simply almost everywhere you choose to look. Indeed, it is getting to the point where one should report where DMT is not found, rather than where it is. James Arthur wrote, The pine tree is one of the well-known central relics of Christmas. Under this tree is where those who are deemed good find their reward in the form of a present. A big red and white rounded mushroom grows under the very tree we are to look under on Christmas morning to find our gift. Green, red, and white as Christmas colors comes from the evergreen tree and the red and white mushrooms underneath. The word Christmas originally comes from the Egyptian Christ, oiled or anointed one, and mace, the sacred cakes annually made and ingested by the Egyptians. This Eucharist was originally made from Amanita muscaria, or was the mushroom itself. The tradition existed all over the ancient world, but most of the iconography and symbology recognized today comes from pre-Christian Northern Europe. James Arthur wrote, The very name Christmas is a holiday name composed of the words Christ, meaning one who is anointed with the magical substance, and Mass, a special religious service or ceremony of the sacramental ingestion of the Eucharist, the body of Christ. In the Catholic tradition, this substance, body, soma, has been replaced by the doctrine of transubstantiation, whereby in a magical ceremony, the priests claim the ability to transform a cracker or round wafer into the literal body of Christ. Dana Larson wrote, "Although most people see Christmas as a Christian holiday, most of the symbols and icons we associate with Christmas celebrations are actually derived from the shamanistic traditions of the tribal peoples of pre-Christian Northern Europe."
So yeah, even with that, like Amanita muscaria mushrooms are even in Canada, like all over the world, and you can find them. So there's going to be different representations of the stories, like these symbolic stories that utilize the Amanita muscaria mushrooms in their versions, right? And so even with people saying like that, like things derived from a specific religion, like how do you know? Like you don't, right? Because even religions nowadays are largely based on astrotheosophy and sun worship, and they don't even realize it. And there are people that are taking it literally when they should not be. I just wanted to share something from Jim Carrey. This is not very long, but but he talks about the alchemical sexual Christ oil, whatever you want to call it. And let's see if he actually says it well in his interview.
About alchemical sexual alchemy.
Sexual alchemy.
Yeah.
I know alchemy.
Talking about Tantra.
I made a lot of money on alchemy in the
Do you
early
know that
70s.
the story of Jesus, how it's been altered in certain ways? I mean, yes, there was a guy. Yes, there was teachings, all that stuff. But there's 33 vertebrae in your spine. There's 33 years in the life of Jesus
Christ. Yeah.
Substance that comes from your medulla, which is basically completely looks like the Ark of the Covenant. Has angel's wings around it, the whole thing. This substance comes from your medulla, makes the trip down your spine to your sacrum, which is
Quick, get a dictionary.
Christ coming down into human form.
Yeah.
And if you don't squander that essence, that sexual essence, it ascends again and goes back up to heaven, which is your thing. It's also the story of Santa Claus. Why he comes down the chimney is because this juice or this whatever substance actually passes what's called the Claustrum, which is where they got Santa Claus. So it goes down the chimney and back up the chimney.
I don't know why it's frozen. I'm sorry about that.
Do you know about it has angel's wings around it, the whole thing? This substance comes from
Still
your
freezing.
to heaven. It goes down the chimney and back up.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go back. So this one also discusses. Sorry. I thought that you were watching that. I didn't start it. I was like looking at other videos first. Luckily, so it was like a minute in that I had already fast forwarded. So
The Claustrum, which is where they got Santa Claus. So it goes down the chimney and back up the chimney.
In the brain, in the cranium, there is the cerebrum. And in the cerebrum, and in particular, the claustrum is sitting right there in the middle of the head, virtually. From the claustrum, there is a secretion, brain fluid. And this fluid is an oil. And in ancient times, this fluid was called, in Greek, it's called Christos. It's called the Christ. It's this beautiful fluid which comes from the cerebrum and pours down the spinal cord. It goes down the spinal cord and it reaches the sacral plexus, right next door to the sacrum, which are the 5 second bottommost fused vertebrae bones at the bottom of the spinal column. The bottommost portion of the spinal column is called the coccyx. Then just above that is the sacrum. 5 fused bones. So the sacral plexus is connected to the sacrum. And the fluid which comes from the cerebrum pours down the spinal cord and comes to the bottommost part of the spinal cord. Now, claustrum is otherwise known as the holy claustrum, simply because of this beautiful oil, this Christos, that is produced and secreted. You see, the word secret comes from secretion, because this secretion is a secret. And the sacrum is the sacred part of the secret. As the secretion pours down the spinal cord and reaches the sacrum, this is the marvelous way in which our body has been designed. And the spinal cord is basically just an extension of the brain. It also does thinking. And you see, the holy claustrum is otherwise known as the Santa Claustrum. You see, because this fluid that goes down to the sacred plexus is a sacred fluid. And this is where the story of Santa Claus bringing presents down the chimney comes from. It's a story of physiology. And the Bible is a beautiful manual of physiological regeneration. What happens with this fluid is that every month when the moon is in the sign where your sun was when you were born.
So, for example, because some people get confused with that because they think astrology and astronomy is the devil, when it's not. It's actually in the Bible, and it even says in the Bible in 9 different verses to seek out wise counsel from astrologers. And so my sun sign, for example, is Capricorn. And so when the moon is in Capricorn, that is the time where there's this seed that is born in my celiac plexus, solar plexus area. And then if I resist temptations and try to live like a more noble life, accessing my higher levels of consciousness, and not doing things like watching porn or like things in excess too, right? With like drinking and drugs and sex, even though again I'm celibate. So again, I'm making this example for everyone, right? Not just trying to make this just about like my own life, because like I could be a little bit more. I get that a lot of people don't want this lifestyle, right? Like being more in the country and more in nature, more hunting and fishing and gardens instead of fake meat or overly processed meats and stuff like that. And it can be also harder for people as well. And so again, if you try to live like a good life and manage even what you eat and drink, this will allow you to access your Christ oil within your brain.
Every month there is a germ or a seed planted in the solar plexus.
I'm watching this with you too, so I haven't watched this specific video yet.
Which is just above the sacral plexus. And that germ is the oil, the Christ, which is born in Bethlehem, because the solar plexus is otherwise known as Bethlehem, where the seed, where the Christ is born. And that seed, that oil needs to return whence it came, in the midbrain. You see, as the oil ascends the spinal cord, the vibration of the oil of the Christ increases. And you see, first of all, the oil is differentiated in the pineal gland and the pituitary gland before it is sent down the spinal cord. And the pineal gland is the electric portion, and the pituitary gland is the magnetic portion. So the oil is differentiated and it is brought down the spinal cord via the Pingala and the Ida nerves. These are what is otherwise known as the Kundalini and the Kundabhatha. So it arrives at the sacral plexus and awaits for the germinating of the seed once a month, 12 times a year. And if we are able to transmute that seed and cause it to rise, as it rises in the spinal cord, it eventually reaches the medulla oblongata and the pons and the midbrain, and it crosses the vagus nerve, otherwise known as the pneumogastric nerve. It's a nerve which descends from the brain area, from the pineal and pituitary glands, respectively, and it feeds the lungs and the stomach. It's a network of nerves, and this network of nerves...
Found the treaty I was talking about. So even with that, I'm going on all these tangents, but even with chemtrails and contrails, way off topic, but I was talking about this earlier. They get around it by calling it geoengineering, and so anyway.
It's called the tree of life. And you see, the ancients knew that this seed that is born in Bethlehem once a month is the Christ, and that if one were to abstain from sex during that period, that oil and seed would be saved, and it would rise, and it would burst through the heart chakra, through the throat chakra, and eventually the oil would arrive with its higher vibration, because you see at the bottom, the oil has a very low vibratory rate. Whereas with proper practices, meditation, breathing, good eating, and good peaceful behavior, one is able to raise that Christ, that oil, so that it crosses the vagus nerve at the top of the spinal column, the 33 vertebrae of the spinal column. You see, because the Christ is crucified at 33 years of age.
That's the average. It's rare, but there are some people that have 34 vertebrae or 32 vertebrae, but the average, the overwhelming average is 33.
When the oil arrives at the very, very top, there awaiting is the optic thalamus, an egg-shaped organ in the middle of the head. When it crosses this pneumogastric nerve, this is called the crucifixion. The oil is not killed and destroyed, but it is magnified 1,000-fold. And the oil then touches the optic thalamus, and for 2.5 days remains in a condition that is considered to be dead, and then reaches the pineal gland after 2.5 days and illuminates the optic thalamus and the pineal gland. The optic thalamus was known as the light of the world by the Egyptians and the Greeks, because they knew their physiology and anatomy, and they knew that this precious oil, which descended from the claustrum, from the cerebrum, and was differentiated in the pineal and pituitary glands, and descended the spinal cord, they knew that it would ascend eventually, and that the enlightened portion of mankind were able to cause this Christ oil to ascend, so that it would ascend to the optic thalamus and cause it to be lightened. What in turn happens is that millions of brain cells that were dormant are now awakened. And you see, there are practices and there are things that are very, very detrimental about this oil or that are detrimental to this oil. For instance, overeating and alcohol and sex practiced at the wrong time. These destroy the seed, and this is what is known as eating from the tree of life. Because you see, the ancients knew that once the oil is depleted because of riotous living, the fleshly organism dies. Death results from using up all of the oil. You see, the oil that descends from the cerebrum is known otherwise as the manna from heaven. You see, because heaven means heaved up. And the head, the cranium, the dome which sits on top of the torso, that was known as the heavens, you see. And the heart area and the heart chakra was known as the Midgard, or the middle garden. And the generative area was known as Sodom and Gomorrah, the area of desire, animal desire, you see. And otherwise known as Egypt and hell and the world, etc. Whereas the Garden of Eden and the land flowing with milk and honey, that's upstairs. In fact, the pineal gland produces the honey, a secretion known as honey, which has DMT in it, and the pituitary body secretes the milk. This is the milk and honey. And the land flowing with milk and honey is upstairs. This is a sacred secret simply because the secretion which comes from the sacral plexus is one of the most important things that we need to know for physiological regeneration. You see, by saving the seed, one can actually live longer. In fact, the ancients used to live for thousands of years by protecting and keeping this this secret and guarding it. The Egyptians built ascension chambers, pyramids, for this very purpose. And they taught the science of respecting and keeping and guarding and looking after this beautiful oil. And if you know the Gospels well, you will know all the scriptures that are referring to it. You see, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness. The light of the world is the optic thalamus. Keep your eye simple, for if your eye is dark, your whole body will be dark. That eye has always been known as the third eye. In fact, it's the spiritual eye. Now, as for the deniers, you see, most churchgoers will be denying this because in their mind, Jesus Christ is a historical person which must return physically in order to...
This gets so many people pissed off. No one is saying that there was not a Jesus Christ figure that did not exist in history. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, wherever, you know what I mean? And Mithras. And no one is saying that. But Jesus Christ is not God. And Jesus Christ, maybe because of how amazing he was, and maybe he accessed his higher levels of consciousness and ascended all, you know, like human, like he resisted temptation, like the stories say. So maybe he, during his time, was so well regarded because of that, right? And they represented him. He was symbolic of the sun because he was, as a human being on Earth, you know, like the best human, I guess, representation of the healing sun that there could be. And maybe this is throughout humanity's existence, right? Maybe there are a few beings that are chosen ones or selected based on how they live their lives and serve their lives to be I don't know, like the leaders of the world into new ages and stuff like that. Who friggin' knows?
Save them because they cannot save themselves. They need a vicarious third-party savior. Whereas the opposite is true. And this is what the so-called Apostle Paul was talking about when he referred to the sacred secret of the Christ within, the Christ that dwelleth within. For you see, the kingdom of God is within. It's not without. And in fact, the words of Jesus are pretty clear where it says, do not be looking out there, for the kingdom of God will not come with striking observableness. Don't look here and don't look there, because there will be deceivers saying, oh, there he is, here is the Christ, there is the Christ. Because the process is within. And unless one is able to raise that energy and get out of the bottom chakras. You see, the bottom chakras deal with sexuality, strife, envy, power, greed, wealth, and all of those things. And if one is constantly seeking those things and constantly eating of the fruit of the tree of life, you see those beautiful nerves, the pneumogastric nerve system, they are responsible for bringing the oil back up, those beautiful spiritual presence. And we are the ones who are responsible for channeling that oil, that Christ seed within, so that it eventually is crucified in the middle of the head. You see, the cerebrum is hollowed out, and the midbrain and the limbic system at the top of the spinal cord is the holy of holies. And the cerebellum, which sits at the back of the brain, this is otherwise known as the small brain. The cerebrum is associated with the top of the head, Aries, and the cerebellum is associated with Taurus, and the left brain, the male left brain. The right brain is the feminine, and it is connected to the cerebrum, Aries, the God brain. You see, we have the God man is the cerebrum, the Adam man is the cerebellum. Now, you won't get any of this in church. This is esoteric.
So even with the Taurus stuff, like Santos and I don't agree with everything he says either. And even with Taurus, like being, I think he was saying like a masculine male energy, that's not true in a lot of cases either. Like, and so like Taurus being the representation of a negative female cooling energy, and Aries being like the male masculine magnetic one. And so the yin and yang, positive and negative. And so anyway.
Truth. Exoteric truth denies this and has been perpetuated for the last few thousand years by so-called Christian churches in order to deny and hide the true story of physical regeneration. In the past, people have lived for thousands of years by preserving and conserving this oil and transmuting it so that it reaches the optic thalamus. You see, what happens when the oil reaches the optic thalamus is that new blood is generated in the body. Until such time as this process has occurred, we will have old, toxic blood in our physical organisms. And in order to regenerate and produce new blood, the oil must be raised.
So even with that, you could do blood fasting, bloodletting, like even donating blood, you know, if you're able to do that. And just by doing that, a lot of people have done that throughout history as well. And even like the original barber shops, they were actually like the red and the white holes and stuff like that. This was also like areas where people would do bloodletting. And very, very ancient practice, very friggin' healing, and regenerates your blood as well. And so I highly encourage people to do that for so many different reasons. 80% of the friggin' blood and plasma at blood donation clinics, yes, that goes to the military. That goes to the pharmaceutical companies, and they make friggin' drugs off of it. Unfortunately, it's annoying. It's disgusting that they do that, and they've continued to like increase the amount that they're using of our own friggin' blood that we're donating, thinking it's going to like just innocent victims that need it. No, it's also 80% of the friggin' blood is going towards drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. It's still drugs, right? And a lot of these drugs are causing a lot more death and harm in humans than the drugs on the friggin' street. And the fentanyl on the street, people are getting that from pharmacies and doctors. But obviously not at their clinic, right? Like they're like the pharmacists and doctors that are doing this. They're doing it illegally, and they're doing it from like other clinics that they're using with like alias names and stuff like that, and or like just giving it to people on the street to distribute. And I've shared that information as well. I'm going on these tangents, but super interesting video. I hope that you're enjoying it.
To the optic thalamus, and healing can occur. And as I said before, the millions of dormant brain cells are reactivated. And the heavens, the cerebrum, were awaiting the return of the prodigal son. You see, because we all have these dormant brain cells in our brains. Yes, because they have not returned any of the oil. And in the Bible, this is known as tithing. You see, this is why the Bible says you must return 1/10 to the Lord. Remember, the Lord, the Lord, refers to the gold. You see, this is how we turn lead into gold. Our spinal cord is like a thermometer. And as the mercury rises with warmth, the more so with enlightenment and consciousness and knowledge, we are able to raise the condition of this oil. And as it climbs the spine and ascends, it raises its vibration. In fact, when it gets crucified at the top of the spine where the pneumogastric nerve is crossed, this does not mean death. This means, crucifixion means to multiply 1,000-fold. And you see, not only is physical regeneration a result of this, but also spiritual regeneration. And one is able to experience the higher mind and clairvoyance. You see, mediumship occurs down in the solar plexus. There are 4 brains in the human body. The cerebrum, what is otherwise known as the God brain, the cerebellum, which is the man brain, the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for the involuntary actions in the body, such as breathing and blood circulation. And the 4th brain is the solar plexus, which is more related to the animal instinctive brain, which receives images from the ether.
I would be remiss not to also mention, like some people talk about, by the way, I have a cognitive science. I was in my 4th year for a science degree, again, another degree, and through Carleton University, and they're pushing woke friggin' misinformation even in the science community. And so my degree's on hold, and I've shared irrefutable evidence with them. But again, there are people that are just like, you're wrong, here's the proof, and they're just like friggin' like hiding away from it. And so then you've got the reptile brain, like people also want to talk about. What they say is like in the lower area of your brain, and I think that this is where these friggin' these stories about like reptile people, I honestly think that it probably came from that, right? And then it just through telephone, it just got like completely bastardized through the ages. These stories about the reptile brain and reptilians and all this other stuff. And I think it's because like what they're classifying as reptilians right now in the irony is internationally is people that are doing bad things, that are doing knowingly criminal things. And I'll do the videos on that as well. This might be a really long video today, but again, it's going to be videos that you're not going to get anywhere else, and they're amazing. And so and that's why I think that people talk about like reptile people, and like they make like the joke about Biden and Hillary Clinton and all these people being like reptile people. I think it's because they're not accessing their higher levels of consciousness, their higher level emotions, and they're very much stuck at the lower levels, right? With hate and fear and greed and lust and like the 7 deadly sins and so many other things that they're allegedly guilty of being involved in. And there's going to be lists coming out, to fudging prove it eventually. But again, it's more of a distraction. It's going to be politicized instead of actually, people being held accountable and jailed that should be in jail. And hopefully once these people get jail that are on these lists that hopefully get released, the people that are in jail right now that are political prisoners for so many different reasons, hopefully they are finally released, because we should do better than this, right? But we have people with accessing their lower level brains, not thinking, and they're again in positions of authority against us, unfortunately. So I've named these people, like the lower level emotion people, that practice like the 7 deadly sins in their regular lives: Melanie Jolie, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, Brian, Bill Blair, Jim Watson, Glenn Gower, now Mark Sutcliffe, like Jagmeet Singh, like friggin' like anyone that's public health that like has pushed anything relating to measures regarding the pandemic, allegedly. Anyway, I'll leave it at that because again, I'm on YouTube. So that's what I wanted to just bring up is like another brain thing that people talk about. I think this is where that conspiracy theory, because it's a theory that has not been proven yet. I think that's where it comes from.
From
lower
the
level shitty human beings doing shitty things and getting away with it, because they're also in and around other shitty human beings that are using their reptile brains, right? Like even the security forces that they use that are not even required, that we should have, you know what I mean? Not them, because they're the ones that are freaking targeting and exploiting and harming us, not the other way around. The irony in this.
air, you see, just like the animals do, and they react correspondingly without reason and logic, instinctively. So you see, this is why it is so important to raise the oil, so that one can get out of the lower mind. The lower mind is the solar plexus.
Meditate.
And wrought
Stop having
with problems. You see, ascension is within. One ascends to heaven, the heaved up place, the dome of the cerebrum. You see, those two flaps, those hollowed out hemispheres of the cerebrum, are otherwise known as the cherubim. You see, in the Bible, God says to Moses, you must build the Ark of the Covenant with 2 cherubim above the Ark, covering over. And inside the Ark shall be placed the manna and the law of God, the 2 tablets. Well, I'm here to tell you that the optic thalamus is the Ark of the Covenant. And the limbic system and the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, the pineal gland, these are the Holy of Holies. This is where one needs to return the good oil. In the middle of the head, there is something known as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the little horse. This is the white horse that Jesus rides upon. There is something known as Ammon's horn. Yeah, absolutely. Ammon's horn in the middle of the head. Ammon's horn?
Sorry.
Goodness me. Would that be in Jesus' name, Ammon, the same dude?
Amen.
Yeah, it would. We have the claustrum. We have the cerebrum, the covering angels, the cherubim, which cover over, because the cerebrum covers over the cerebellum and the midbrain and the optic thalamus and the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, otherwise known as Joseph and Mary. You see, these two are the ones that are responsible for sending the oil down the spine, down the spinal cord. And they are the ones that await the return of their son, who is born in Bethlehem, the solar plexus, once a month. Once a month, when the moon is in the sun sign that you were born under.
I mean, just so brilliant. Like I haven't watched this specific video before, but I've watched some stuff on Santos Bonacci, quite a few videos from Santos Bonacci before. And I really encourage people to take a look at his work with an open mind, verify your results, any research yourself as well. But you'd be remiss, honestly, in not taking a look at his work, especially his older work. Because, I mean, you can only add so much to groundbreaking information, right? Over the years. I think this was, I'll just finish off with Eric Dubé and magic mushrooms and the connection with Santa Claus and the reindeer.
The sacred mushroom of these people was the red and white Amanita muscaria mushroom. These people...
There are also yellow and white Amanita muscaria mushrooms, so I'm very interested to see why that's also not mentioned. It just, again, it's just based on people's geopolitical spectrum, I guess, and where they inhabit, like what region they inhabit in the world, as to like what is going to be available to them, whether it be land, whether it be creature, species, like plant life or human.
Lived in dwellings made of birch and reindeer hide called yurts. Somewhat similar to a teepee, the yurt's central smoke hole is often also used as an entrance. After gathering the mushrooms from under the sacred trees where they appeared, the shamans would fill their sacks and return home. Climbing down the chimney entrances, they would share out the mushrooms' gifts with those within. Santa also dresses like a mushroom gatherer. When it was time to go out and harvest the magical mushrooms, the ancient shamans would dress much like Santa, wearing red and white fur-trimmed coats and long black boots. To this day, Siberian shamans dress in ceremonial red and white fur-trimmed jackets to gather the magic mushrooms. First, they pick and place the mushrooms to partially dry on nearby pine boughs, which prepares them for ingestion and makes the load lighter. This is why we decorate our Christmas trees with ornaments and bulbs, because the gatherers would always adorn trees with drying mushrooms. Next, the shaman collects his red and white presents in a sack and proceeds to travel from house to house, delivering them. During Siberian winters, the snow piles up past the doors of their yurts or huts, so the red and white clad shaman must climb down the smoke hole or chimney to deliver the presents in his sack. Finally, the appreciative villagers string the mushrooms up or put them in stockings hung affront the fire to dry. When they awake in the morning, their presents from under the pine tree are all dried and ready to eat. Dana Larson wrote, "The Amanita mushroom needs to be dried before being consumed. The drying process reduces the mushroom's toxicity while increasing its potency. The shaman would guide the group in stringing the mushrooms and hanging them around the hearth fire to dry. This tradition is echoed in the modern stringing of popcorn and other items." James Arthur wrote, "The ancient shamanic use of Amanita muscaria in Siberia is well documented. Despite governmental oppression against its use, there are still many who refuse to accept the authorized state religion and continue the shamanic traditions in secret. Just as the Siberian shaman, commonly dressing in red and white, would enter through the opening in the roof of a home where a ritual was to be done, Santa Claus also arrives on the roof and enters through the chimney. Just as the shamans would gather the mushrooms in bags, which they would bring with them when performing a ceremony, Santa Claus also, on the holy day, brings presents in a bag. Siberian reindeer also enjoy eating Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and thus are often used as a lure by the deer-herding natives. Since one of the hallucinatory experiences often felt on psychedelic mushrooms is that of flying, Santa's flying reindeer most likely derive from this.
In the Arctic Circle, this fungus also has magical associations with animals. Fly agaric contains hallucinogenic chemicals and is a favorite food of reindeer. For thousands of years, the lives of reindeer and Sami people have been entwined. Fly agaric was important to both of them. In autumn, reindeer seek out the mushrooms, even under an early fall of snow. No one knows whether the reindeer are affected, but in the past, Sami shamans took fly agaric in their visionary rituals.
They still do. A lot of people still do.
They even drank urine from reindeer, believed to be under the influence.
Yep. I've talked about urine therapy before. I highly recommend people take a look at it. But yeah, even shaman and other people drink. They still do. They drink the urine from deer or any animal that's consumed Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and they've said that like they've had like the most intense, like hallucinogenic, spiritual experiences of their lives with this stuff. I've also heard the same things about ayahuasca. I've tried mushrooms before, but I didn't get like a high or anything like that. I didn't feel like I was flying. I definitely, I was more creative and I definitely like light impacted me like a lot more, and I was more focused. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I didn't feel like flying or any of that stuff. But I also didn't take a lot, and so that's definitely the biggest reason. And I would love to try ayahuasca. It's not legal in Canada, but if I could go to a legal place and do things legally, there's a lot of people that talk about these spiritual experiences that they've had, and I'd be really interested in doing it for that reason, not just to get high.
Contacted the great reindeer spirit. On humans, the drug heightens senses and creates visions of flying. Some believe the greatest of all modern myths arose in the Sami's visionary flights of fancy. Perhaps early 19th century ideas drew on these stories to create a Christmas legend.
Dana Larson wrote, "Reindeer were the sacred animals of these semi-nomadic people, as the reindeer provided food, shelter, clothing, and other necessities. Reindeer are also fond of eating the amanita mushrooms. They will seek them out and prance about while under their influence. The effects of the amanita mushroom usually include sensations of size distortion and flying. The feeling of flying could account for the legends of flying reindeer, and legends of shamanic journeys included stories of winged reindeer transporting their riders up to the highest branches of the world tree. The flying reindeer, sleigh, and the entire Santa Claus mythology originates from Siberia, where Saint Nicholas, the patron saint of children...
Again, even with that, I don't agree with that. Even with Eric Dubé, like, he's a freaking genius, obviously, bar none. But there are also things that I don't agree with that he says as well, because like this is also like it's all different representations of the same things that are experienced and seen all over the world.
Is a supplanter to the indigenous shamans. James Arthur wrote, "Saint Nicholas, known as the patron saint of children, is the most revered saint in Russia, second only to the apostles. He is the Russian Orthodox Church's supplanter to the native people's highly respected local shaman. A shaman is a holy man that is well acquainted with a form of spirituality that incorporates plant entheogens, which facilitate the NDE, near-death experience, or out-of-body experience. Saint Nicholas may not have been a shaman, yet the symbolism on and coloring of his robes could lend to speculation." Dana Larson wrote, "One of the side effects of eating amanita mushrooms is that the skin and facial features take on a flushed, ruddy glow. This is why Santa is always shown with glowing red cheeks and nose. Even Santa's jolly ho 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 is the euphoric laugh of one who has indulged in the magic fungus. Santa's famous magical journey, where his sleigh takes him around the whole planet in a single night, is developed from the heavenly chariot used by the gods from whom Santa and other shamanic figures are descended. The chariot of Odin, Thor, and even the Egyptian god Osiris is now known as the Big Dipper, which circles around the North Star in a 24-hour period."
I've mentioned this so many times before as well, and this, again, this it can look like a swastika. It's like the number 7 in reverse, upside down.
In different versions of the ancient story, the chariot was pulled by reindeer or horses. As the animals grew exhausted, the chariot was pulled by an other shamanic figure. Period.
Okay, and so even with this too, it's okay. Yeah, he talks about this. So like during the summer winter solstices, this location, and then the fall and spring equinoxes, like, in these positions. So it has everything to do with this divine clock, cosmic clock.
In different versions of the ancient story, the chariot was pulled by reindeer or horses. As the animals grew exhausted, their mingled spit and blood falls to the ground, forming amanita mushrooms. James Arthur wrote, "It is fairly common knowledge that the Weihnachtsmann, Saint Nick, was an amalgamation of older Germanic Norse gods such as Thor, Donner, Odin, and Wotan. What's missing here is, just as Santa flies through the skies in his sleigh, Odin, as well as the rest, rode through the sky in his chariot, which is depicted in the stars by the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper is the chariot of Odin and Wotan, Thor, King Arthur, and even Osiris of Egypt. The chariot that circles the North Star in a 24-hour period is thus also known as the sleigh of Santa Claus, because it circles his mythological home, the North Pole. It is no surprise that Nordic Germanic gods have a connection to mushrooms in their mythology. As Thor throws his mushroom-shaped hammer to the ground, mighty thunders and lightning cracks cause the real mushrooms to appear. As the horses pulling Odin through the sky in his chariot become overexerted, their blood-mingled spit falls to the ground and causes the Amanita mushrooms to grow at those exact points. Probably the first Santa was Osiris in ancient Egypt, who rode his flying chariot to and from the North Pole, was born on December 25th, and celebrated by putting presents underneath an evergreen tree. James Arthur wrote, "Not only did Osiris ride the sky in a chariot, but after his death Isis found that an evergreen, cedar, had grown overnight from a dead stump to full-sized, which was understood as a sign of Osiris's rebirth and immortality. Interestingly, the traditional birth of Osiris is the 25th of December. The 25th of December was also celebrated annually by putting presents around the cedar tree. This tradition is at least 5,000 years old. The birth of Horus to the goddess Virgin Mother Isis is perhaps the eldest representation of the goddess sun mythology. Yet it is impossible to know this, or the real age of the astrotheological Virgo giving birth to the child god star mythology for sure. However, it is the oldest source I have found. Santa, an anagram for Satan, dresses in red, keeps lists of naughty and nice children, and seems to steal Christmas from Jesus. But if understood in its original mushroom context, Santa's not a conniving, omniscient list keeper. He's an entheogen.
So I'm going to go out there a little bit, and just because there's a lot of talk about like Satan and Lucifer and like the devil worship, all of this stuff, and with like child sacrifice and animal sacrifices and especially in occult groups and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I also think that these are people that are misinterpreting mother nature and the world and the realities and the unfortunate cycles of life based on suffering and strife and things like that. And so in North America, for example, in our like during our spring and summer months, like even a little bit in the fall, but like Canada, we have long winters, long cold winters, and during this period of time, there's no growing food. There's no plants there's no plant life. You know what I mean? We have like deciduous and coniferous trees and stuff like that. But like, but you can't, again, like it's covered in snow. Like there's no way of getting friggin' gardens and stuff like that. So there, and this is for like, honestly, like there's only like a 4-month period at the most that Canada has, like where we can grow, like grow and harvest food. And there's only so much that you can that you can harvest, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and then can and stuff like that over winter months. And there's been a period of times where people have not had like food harvests and stuff like that. And then there's been like suffering and famines and stuff like that, even within Canada, but like all over the friggin' world. And I've given so many examples already. And there's examples of this, like even with Holodomor in Ukraine or North Korea, even now, where people are, they're starving. There's people that are making a lot of food, unfortunately too, which is crazy, and they're not allowed to touch it or eat it, or, you know, they can get friggin' in prison and stuff like that. But they're shipping this food, these resources and this food to other countries, right? So we're seeing that in Canada as well. Like we're starting to get a lot more exploitation. But anyway, so during the long winter months, like during these periods of time when there's not a lot of animals, you know, because even they, you know what I mean, have gone off, you know what I mean, and or been over eaten, over poached and stuff like that, and just like not there. And so these are periods of time where people also committed cannibalism as a means to survive. And these are disgusting, awful things to do, obviously, right? And a lot of health implications too, because we are dirty animals, you know, especially with what we consume and like all the chemicals and stuff like that in our bodies. And there's even like diseases that people get for eating other humans that are, it's terminal. And so like, so again, unless you're at risk of dying, you know what I mean? Like this is not stuff that people do. And it's often like, again, people have passed away because of starvation and, or, you know, because of the, like extreme cold. Like that is what you more have to look at, especially in places like Canada and northern regions. And then on the 25th of December, like this was a day where it was a celebration because of, you know, all religions and occult groups, like they base their their symbology off of astrotheosophy. So the luminaries and the sun and the moon, unfortunately, even though they don't freaking realize that that's what they do. And so on the 25th, this is when the sun rises again from its lowest point and starts its ascent into like the spring, and then Aries, you know what I mean? And then into the summer, and then fall, and then starts its fall, and anyways, and goes back down. And so this would be a period of time where there would be animal sacrifice and or human sacrifice, disgustingly, unfortunately, it's to be not the animals, but to the humans, to be eaten during this time, because as a means of survival, but also to pay tribute or whatever you want to call it to, like the sun, like making it that far, you know what I mean, and getting to the lowest point, and then like knowing that there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. And so ways that you can friggin' give back, right, and your sacrifices to the earth literally is supposed to be things, ladies and gentlemen. It's not taking away, it's giving back. And so people are doing it friggin' wrong because of misinterpretations of friggin' suffering, and people going through hard times. And but like planting seeds, like honoring nature, like, you know what I mean? These are ways to give back, and these are sacrifices, or whatever you want to call it, taking away from your own plate to give to nature, and or animals within nature. Like, this is the ways you freaking give back. Like, and there should be a lot more like sacredness and sanctity in killing of animals, even for substance, right? Especially over winter harsh climates and conditions where people don't have access to fruits and vegetables and things like that on a regular basis. It's just not reality of where a lot of people live and or how they can live. And anyway, I just want to talk about that. And of course, it's during like this time, right? And then even with Aquarius and Capricorn, they are ruled by the luminary Saturn, which a lot of people like misinterpret as being Satan and all that stuff. But again, this is all about winter. This is all about cold months and stuff like that, and chattering of teeth and stuff like that, and everything to do with like the Christmas period, well, winter, and the cold periods, the cold months, and like the sun like dying essentially for, and being at its lowest point and having longer nights and shorter days, and Capricorn is represented by a goat oftentimes, and Aquarius by a human. And so even this like half goat, half human friggin' like representation of Satan that they put out there with the friggin' horns and stuff like that, this is just astrotheosophy, right? And they're making this seem like a very friggin' negative friggin' time, and it has been for people, you know what I mean? But there's, you got to look at the friggin' positives, right? And like try to mitigate harm and suffering and death during the friggin' hard winter months, right? Because for a lot of friggin' people, it's rough, especially in friggin' Canada and Russia and Norway and Finland and Sweden and friggin' you name it.
Or substance, which is said to generate the God within. The word entheogen breaks down en for inside, theo for God, and gen for generate. Generate the God inside. If you have ever taken an entheogen, like psilocybin, DMT, peyote, or ayahuasca, then you are already aware of the spiritual or even religious experiences associated with them. As anyone who has tried them knows, and most anyone who hasn't fiercely denies, these entheogens put us directly in contact with that spark of the divine within ourselves. They allow us access to higher consciousness and open our third eyes. The outer material world dissolves, and the five senses return to a state of one sense, one consciousness. James Arthur wrote, "First-hand understanding is through the ingestion of the holy substances, of which there has been so much written that this brief expose merely scratches the surface of. It is this direct communal contact which is truly the means whereby a human being can experience his true spiritual nature. One must take very seriously his or her own spirituality, for this is that which we truly are. As I stated in the opening sentence, this experience is of extremely great value, so much so that I feel it necessary to the evolutionary process of each and every individual, and inevitably to all of mankind. If you have mischief, wickedness, or secrecy in you, then entheogens will take you down into the depths of your own hell. But if you have kindness, love, and truth within you, entheogens will raise you up into the heights of that heaven. When people of a poor disposition or in a negative mood eat magic mushrooms, they usually have a bad trip and experience frightening or depressing hallucinations. When people of a good disposition or in a positive mood eat mushrooms, they usually have a great trip and experience hours of uncontrollable laughter and a loving, close feeling with everyone around. Just like at Christmas, Santa keeps lists of children who are naughty and nice, at Easter, only good kids get to eat the colored eggs. This is likely because good kids on mushrooms are hilarious and lots of fun, whereas naughty kids on mushrooms guarantee a bad trip for
That makes
everyone,
sense.
so they get coal at Christmas and no eggs at Easter. James Arthur wrote, Santa Claus is an all-knowing icon that reads the hearts and intentions of everyone on the planet. Each child is told the story of the round man who wears red and white, and his associates, reindeer, little people, and Mrs. Claus. They are also told the story of a miraculous worldwide flight in a sleigh, which results in presents being delivered under a tree. Yet when a child reaches the age of reasoning, he is informed that this story is all a fabrication. This revelation is devastating upon the psyche of a young mind. It is also at this time that the child is often comforted and pacified from the shock by very strong reinforcement that the religious systems which the parents or guardians profess are indeed factual, and an attempt is made to incorporate the respective religious traditions into the holiday as the real meaning for the celebration. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny have both been uprooted from their original positions. They began as mythological mushroom heroes understood in a spiritual context both by children and adults. Now their literal meaning has been suppressed, and a fake image has been corporatized by Coke, Cadbury, and others. The effect this has had is to turn mythological heroes into fantasies and lies. It was not meant for children to discover as they're coming of age that parents, family, and friends have lied to them about Santa and the Easter Bunny. It was meant for them to discover deeper meanings behind the mythologies, such as the ancient astrotheological understanding of the heavens, the knowledge of the zodiacal procession, the seasonal cycles like solstices and equinoxes. The whole complexity of the modern Christmas mythos is an unexplainable mess without the magic mushroom. The story is completely unintelligible. Dana Larson wrote, some psychologists have discussed the cognitive dissonance which occurs when children are encouraged to believe in the literal existence of Santa Claus, only to have their parents' lie revealed to them when they are older. By so deceiving our children, we rob them of a richer heritage. Many people in the modern world have rejected Christmas as being too commercial, claiming that this ritual of giving is actually a celebration of materialism and greed. Yet, the true spirit of this winter festival lies not in the exchange of plastic toys, but in celebrating a gift from the earth, the fruiting top of a magical mushroom, and the revelatory experiences it can provide. Instead of perpetuating outdated and confusing holiday myths, it might be more fulfilling to return to the original source of these seasonal celebrations. How about getting back to basics and enjoying some magical mushrooms with your loved ones this solstice? What better gift can a family share than a little piece of love and enlightenment?
It's the most wonderful time of the year, with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's the happiest season of all, with those holiday greetings and gay happy meetings when friends come to call. It's the happiest season of all. There'll be parties for hosting, marshmallows for toasting, and caroling out in the snow. There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. It's the most wonderful time of the year. There'll be much mistletoeing and hearts will be glowing when loved ones are near. It's the most wonderful time of the year. There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago.
I don't know if you already shared the Super Mario Bros. I just ran upstairs. My dogs wanted to go out for a little bit. I still want to share some stuff with you, even though I'm friggin' over an hour in. I'm committed. Because I talked about Whitney Webb before, and I would love to friggin' talk with her. It would have to be in person, and I guarantee like a week it could go by and we would probably still be talking about stuff that we can't talk about on social media.
For people, it says one nation under blackmail is.
Sorry, so the title is The Mafia, CIA, and Jeffrey Epstein worked together to traffic minors.
A damning indictment of the consequences resulting from the nearly century-old relationship between both U.S. and Israeli intelligence and the organized crime network known as the National Crime Syndicate. Can you is that real? There's a thing called the National Crime Syndicate. This seems like a cartoon.
Yeah, well, no, it is real. So it was a decentralized network of different organized crime groups operating in the United States in the early 20th century. So historically, organized crime in the U.S., most people are probably familiar with it because of Hollywood and whatnot, tend to sort of be an ethnic enclave. So you'd have Irish organized crime, the Jewish mob, the Italian mafia, and so on. So the National Crime Syndicate sort of broke down those silos and brought these different groups together, and that made them a lot more successful.
That was their name, the National Crime Syndicate?
Yes, yes.
And they didn't have any qualms about, so this is in documents that they were referred to as this?
Yeah. It's definitely not something I made up. That's for sure. So this was basically an outgrowth of something called Murder Inc. and some other things that the main people behind it were Mayor Lansky, I guess representing the Jewish mob there, and then Lucky Luciano of the Italian mafia. And so they basically came together, and in World War II, they formally teamed up with the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. And this was justified as necessary because it was the war, right? So a wartime necessity justification. But then the war ends, and then, the intelligence apparatus of the U.S. and these mob guys realize they have a lot in common and they work really well together. And so that's why in the 60s, in the 50s, you see a lot of, the people involved in assassination stuff for the CIA after it was made. You see a lot of mob guys around, for example. And there's a lot of other examples of them, interacting on and off, over the years that maybe more people are familiar with. But, a lot of this involved like the realm of shadow banking finance. It expanded into the world of corporate power as well, and ended up just really becoming out of control. And also, you have, like you mentioned earlier, Israeli intelligence sort of get involved in this developing power nexus as well, because the Jewish mob side of the National Crime Syndicate was heavily involved in the arming of the Haganah and the precursor to the IDF and all of this. So basically, by the time the State of Israel is created, these alliances are, part of its national security state from the off.
So you've documented literally the organized crime from World War II era coming together with our government.
Yeah.
And working together now, and to coordinate all them together, all the different crime families. There was a thing called the National Crime Syndicate that
but they fought with each other. Like there was factionalism, and so like some of these guys teamed up to take out their competition, consolidate power. So I wouldn't say that this group, right, is the same they were back in the 30s and 20s. I mean, a lot has happened over time, but I think I make a really good case in the book that this is where a lot of it started, or you could maybe argue it happened before, specifically in New York City, because you had the Democratic Party, specifically in New York City, become very much entwined with organized crime. This happened in the early 20th century as well with Tammany Hall, which was very much involved with the power apparatus of New York, but they ended up taking over, organized crime ended up taking over the leadership of a lot of unions and later voting precincts, among other things, which allowed them to consolidate a lot of power in New York, specifically in the Democratic Party at first, and of course, you know, later the Republicans as well. But that's part of what what led to Operation Underworld, as it's called, the formal team up between the mob and the Navy, naval intelligence, and the CIA precursor.
There's a name for it? It's called,
it's called Operation Underworld. It's a real thing. You can look it up. The U.S. government waited 60 years to admit it was real, but they had to eventually.
And what did they do? And what was Operation Underworld?
That's where the Office of Naval Intelligence and the precursor to the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services, teamed up with organized crime.
And what specifically what was the service that organized crime could provide that the government couldn't do for themselves?
Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier about the mob and the unions, what they wanted was intelligence from the dock workers, and the dock workers union was controlled by the mob.
Oh.
So yeah, so that's sort of how it started, but it advanced like a lot.
So getting info on the unions is kind of their way to push back against the commies, right?
Well, a lot of this is back in World War II, right? So it was all about it was about German saboteurs. It was about the Nazis. But then you see over time that a lot of the same type of behavior is, you know, all sorts of things, including working with organized crime or drug cartels or what have you. In the decades later, you know, like in the 80s, for example, it's all justified by quote unquote anti-communism and stuff like that.
And so so I really appreciate you reporting on this. Why is no one else seemingly? I haven't heard anything about this until people told me about your book. So why is no one else or are other people reporting this?
Well, I think it's been written on before, but I don't think it's been the story's been told the same way. I guess I sort of strung it together. I'm sort of giving you 100-year history. I think there are people that have written about Operation Underworld specifically, but not necessarily like recently, you know, because it was something that was they let be known maybe like 20 years ago or something.
And so they're still not letting us know about the Kennedy assassination. So you can't actually, you know. But what did you uncover anything that would lead to any knowledge about that and the CIA's involvement? Because I had Ray McGovern on Wednesday, and he said that there definitely was.
Yeah, I've shared it.
So from what I understand, there have been some successful efforts to get new information out from the documents they've been trying not to release that more or less are being described as smoking gun evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald had established relationship with the CIA. So I didn't really deal with the Kennedy assassination directly in the book, because then it would have been like 3 books. Because there's people that have written entire books, right, about the Kennedy assassination. So I talked about some things. I talked about Perm Index, for example, which is sort of a suspect company that a lot of people that have investigated the Kennedy assassination over the years have pointed to in their connections to this particular network that I'm writing about in the book. And I also write about an effort to sexually blackmail John F. Kennedy after he was elected, in the time he was president-elect and before inauguration. And that same sexual blackmail network, it was British intelligence, British intelligence and British organized crime. They had previously taken down the government in the UK in what is known as the Profumo affair. And one of the same women that was used in that network was taken overseas to New York, allegedly slept with Kennedy, and then somehow the CIA allegedly helped her escape back to the UK. The FBI arrested her and her apparent handler, had her client list. Sound familiar? But instead of releasing the client list, they destroyed it.
So it sounds familiar. I didn't know about this. I've never heard about that. So the intelligence tried to set a trap. So it sounds like, so we're going to connect this together, because the second part of your book is about Jeffrey Epstein, and Jeffrey Epstein obviously had connections to the CIA and the intelligence community. So it seems like they would try to get this blackmail stuff on powerful people, and then they could get them to do their biddings. But so did it work with Kennedy? It seems like it didn't work.
No, it didn't really work there because it was exposed to an
okay.
extent, the operation, and traced back to British intelligence. So there was a very sloppy cover up where Mariella Novotny, who was the name of the girl, was how she was allowed to flee the country with the apparent help of U.S. intelligence, because at that time there was a very cozy relationship, I guess you could say, and there arguably still is, between the U.S. and British intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And so she was allowed sort of to get out unscathed. But yeah, one of the things that really surprised me when writing this book is how sexual blackmail pops up over and over again in various big events and scandals in U.S. history. And so part of what I'm trying to show, and a big reason why I wrote Volume 1, is to really break apart the mainstream media narrative that
And I will say this forever, which is why also it would be a good idea to have women like not be excluded from like these institutions and organizations, because like not only are like a lot more women, especially now that I know, especially in Canada, we're the ones speaking out on the front lines trying to expose this stuff, but we're also we're not going to get duped like it's, well, I mean the non-lesbians, right? Like you can have like the sexiest like a honeypot you want, you know, I'm not gonna fall for it, you know, like that stuff, right? Where I know a lot of men that would, right? And like most of my friggin' exes cheated, except for like my most recent last one. And so the other ones were all government, right? All travel internationally and would be the ones that would be easily and willingly, openly wanting to have sex with honeypots. and yeah, it is what it is, but which is why we need to have more stronger ethical codes within our Canadian Armed Forces and this woke narrative as well, which is also not helping women at all. In fact, yeah, and the biggest focus now is on getting tampons in men's bathrooms. Like, what are you talking about when people are homeless, still serving in uniform?
Jeffrey Epstein was an anomaly, that his behavior was exclusive to him, and now he's dead, so none of this stuff it doesn't matter anymore. This is a type of activity that has been done over and over and over again in our political system, and it was it was a move, and it's a type of operation really that was perfected first by the mob. So, you know, this is something that's really born out of, in my opinion, this organized crime intelligence team up. And now, you know, it's just been going on for an excessive amount of time at this point.
So here, well, let me give this to you as a jumping off point. This is more from the description of the book. It says this book specifically explores how the nexus between intelligence and organized crime directly developed the sexual blackmail tactics and networks that would later enable the sexual blackmail operation and other crimes of deceased pedophile and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Other books on Jeffrey Epstein focus on the depraved nature of his crimes or his wealth and his most famous politically connected friends and acquaintances, but this book, in contrast, reveals the extent to which Epstein's activities were state-sponsored through an exploration of his intelligence connection. So tell me about, so when the Pizzagate thing happened, right? When Pizzagate broke, that story, I didn't pay much attention to it, but what did catch my eye was what I thought was an overreaction to a bunch of people online saying that there was a sexual pedophile ring in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, well, first of all, that sounds completely reasonable to assume that there's a sex pedophile ring servicing powerful people in Washington, D.C. That's not crazy to think that could happen. And then no, I just lost my chain of thought. So they overreacted to that. Just like Seth Rich, if you even mentioned it, you were banished from society. You couldn't ask questions about it. You couldn't cover it. You couldn't do anything. And I was just like, what is going on? Why are they overreacting to this Pizzagate thing so much? Why do they have to? Why is that? And then you find out it's because there actually is a pedophile ring happening, and it's sponsored by the intelligence community, and it involves a bunch of really powerful people, like part of the royal family and Bill Clinton, and people and Hollywood stars and people like that go to Jeffrey Epstein's island and have sex with kids. And we know this
It's
for
not
a
even
fact, and
remotely
there's a
just there.
flight log.
That's why
And
even
so-
with this list and on who's on the island, first of all, you're never going to get like most of the people. So you should also be asking for not for us to friggin' see, because that's disgusting, but like, where's the videos? Because there's a lot of blackmail. There's videos, there's photos and things like that, right? So like, I would trust that more than a friggin' list, which is why they're trying to like do a lot more with AI and stuff like that and Chat GPT. This is a way to like excuse their friggin' actions as adults. And there's underground tunneling systems literally everywhere, and there's a lot more of this activity, these activities happening even in your friggin' like in city centers, in and around, like even in major hotel chains, motel chains, and it's happening in Airbnbs, guys. And so I know this, unfortunately, because of my line of work and stuff like that, just like Whitney Webb, we know this for a fucking fact. And we call the friggin' time, even in the last like couple of months. And do they do anything about it? No. Just like there's a lot of friggin' protests happening right now, like people that are using what's going on, a lot more of those than other churches, but also going during Christmas time, Christ Mass time, and going to our malls. Why is this going to our malls? Like even even in Bayshore, there's the fights taking place, and Laval, Quebec. You know, like a couple of hours from like literally where I am, there's these friggin' people having these protests and being and uttering threats and being belligerent and you see security guards and cops doing absolutely nothing about that. Yet during the Freedom Convoy, it was a friggin' different story, right? Like even Chrystia Freeland, like freezing bank accounts and stuff like that, like people that were being completely peaceful, and that's not happening. And this is just it's the hypocrisy, and this is also not lost on myself and people like me. And there's no amount of like Christian Heritage Months that you could put together or spin to make it better, right? This stuff needs to friggin'. I don't support what's going on with the mass genocides right now. I do have first of all, I've deployed. And I know about the rules of engagement and stuff like that, and law of armed conflict. I've done those courses, and I got pretty much perfect on the examinations and stuff like that to get those certifications, and so I know that there's crimes being committed against humanity right now, and that is not part of anyone's ROEs. Okay, and so these are crimes against humanity, and there's also Netanyahu, who is even in the last 24 hours lying to people. He's a lobbyist criminal as well, and lying about things that happened and lying about who did the things that happened, and doesn't want to talk about Hamas being an organization that's funded by him and his friends and his family internationally. And then even like the website that they use, it's literally a software, like it's an app that is literally Israeli, so that's not even being hidden. And look at Palestine and Gaza and stuff like that right now. Like, do you literally think that they have the capacity, like the IT capacity or anything, when they're living in squalor right now? Unfortunately, like their water is shut off, electricity is shut off, no access to food or supplies, and the majority of the people that are dying there innocently are children. And I just you have these little shills, troll, elf on the shelf men that haven't, like, that couldn't even finish 1 week of boot camp, and they're talking about like just totally supporting this, and it's disgusting because these are supposed to be men, okay, and they have a large platform. I'm talking about Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and and Jordan Peterson, unfortunately to varying degrees as well, like supporting that, like this mass genocide. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't. They may be intelligent, and and they don't want to like talk bad about their money, their donors, like the people that literally fund their lives. But I would say that saying nothing is better than lying about crimes against humanity. I called that out as well with Ben Shapiro, like even within like hours of him like lying about like babies being burned and stuff like that, and showing a charred baby, that was not true. And so many other things I've called out since then. But again, look at my Rumble account, because I can't talk about half this stuff on YouTube because I don't want to risk getting a strike yet again. Anyways, Go back to Whitney Webb.
I guess that was, just like with when the Wuhan virus.
And I just wanted to say again, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, her father, Jordan Maxwell, is also someone that's affiliated with Netanyahu and his friends, and even like the quote unquote leader Abbas of Palestine, who is a corrupted warlord as well, who is also part of the money laundering. And people are suckers, man, to believe this shit. Even in Afghanistan, we sent billions of dollars in aid, even in Canada. And even like I called out, even then, like there was no, like none of that money, or like not even remotely, even like 5% of that money was going to the soldiers on the ground or to infrastructure for civilians. And it was going to warlords and international lobbyists.
Speculating that COVID started from a virus that was engineered in a lab in Wuhan, China, and they immediately have to overreact to that and say you're a racist if you think that, right? So that was, that's again, your flag, my bullshit detector went off. You guys are overreacting too hard to that. And so this is just, so what you are saying is that Jeffrey Epstein isn't a one-off. This isn't some anomaly inside of our culture. This is a regular classic CIA PSYOP, or classic CIA program to do this. This is how they get powerful people under the CIA's control to do their bidding. This is probably why Donald Trump didn't release those JFK files on his way out the door, because the CIA didn't want him to do it, and they probably have blackmail material on him. And they tried to blackmail him a million different ways. One way was Russiagate. Another way was the P-tape. Another way was with his impeachment. They blackmailed him saying, we're gonna have the Senate go along with the impeachment if you do that. So anyway, this is a very long question, so take it wherever you want.
Okay, so there's a lot of different places to go. So I guess first off, yes, this is something that's been going on a very long time. In fact, the longtime director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who was in charge of that agency for decades and decades and decades, the top law enforcement official in the US, he was sexually blackmailed by the mob in the 30s. And he didn't even go after organized crime at all because of that. And that's a matter of record. He denied it ever happened. And the sexual blackmail operation that entrapped him also intimately involved a man named Roy Cohn, who was best known as Donald Trump's mentor. And the two of them, along with a mob-linked businessman named Louis Rosenstein, were seen engaging in sexual blackmail operations themselves. But again, Hoover and Cohn only joined that after they themselves had been entrapped. And this involved minors.
Oh,
so this
no
is something
kidding.
that's been going. Yeah, this is something that's been going on a really long time.
So you're saying,
and even in addition to that,
you're saying J. Edgar Hoover was entrapped sexually with a minor by the mob, by the mafia.
Well, so at first he was involved in this sexual blackmail operation after he was blackmailed by the mob.
Speaking of mobs in Canada, I don't know if people know this, but there's a mob guy that's not Canadian, who people were calling to be taken out of Canada, right? To go back to his country, be extradited, whatever you want to call it. Good old Ford and that fucking fudging alleged possible crime family, not allowing that to happen. So like, who's this guy blackmailing? That's part of our government. Who? I don't know why I said that. I like owls.
That involved children, but he was initially blackmailed because he was a photo of him was taken giving oral sex to his longtime deputy.
And just to be clear, if people don't know this, Doug Ford, there's other conservatives that were part of his other conservatives within cabinet or working within cabinet or around cabinet, because Doug Ford's the premier, so technically not cabinet. Sorry, my dogs are Smokey and Ranger. Can you not? I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so like the multiple people, was it John Tory? Anyway, I think it was maybe John Tory, but like multiple of them were cheating on their wives with staffers, and like recently within like the last year or two. And so there's a lot of people within cabinet or working around cabinet that are not only liars but are cheating on their wives. So do you really think that they're the most ethical, noble, moral people that have your best interest at heart, when like look how much their net worth is now as compared to pre pandemic or tenure working for government. Some people just need to get arrested and fuck off already.
Clyde Tolson. And that was taken by affiliates of Mayor Lansky of the Jewish mob. And later those fell into the hands of James Jesus Angleton, the first counterintelligence chief of the CIA. So that's another example of how the mob and the CIA like to share intelligence, right? And how the CIA can justify almost anything, right, in the name of gathering intelligence. I think actually in the UK they passed a law recently where intelligence agents or assets can even commit murder or any sort of crime as long as they justify it as intelligence gathering activity. So, you know, this is something that gets brushed under the rug because there's no accountability for U.S. intelligence services at all. And in addition to that, I mean, you have things like the Page Boy scandal in 1982 that was brushed under the rug, where congressmen were caught basically engaging in sex with congressional pages who were underage.
Really? I forgot. This it was in 1982.
Yep. And then you have the Franklin scandal. The expert on that is Nick Bryant, who, if you want to learn more about that, I would encourage you to have him on your show.
What is it?
But that was basically about Republican. It was a lobbyist that was running it in Washington named Craig Spence, nominally a lobbyist who claimed to have CIA connections. His partner was a guy named Larry King, based in Nebraska. Larry King would get kids from Nebraska, fly them out to DC, and they would basically be raped and assaulted by powerful people. And it's a very crazy story. And again, I'm not the expert in that. I do include it in the book, of course, because it's very relevant. But of course, I'm drawing a lot from Brian's work on that.
We covered the Jerry Sandusky situation. Now, he was the guy from Penn State who was sexually abusing the students constantly, and that through that story, I learned that there are networks of these pedophiles, and they have conventions almost, right? And that Jerry Sandusky would they'd take their boys to be trafficked there to trade them and stuff like that. And
yeah, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Louis Freeh, the former FBI director, involved in some aspect of covering up Sandusky's activities? Because he was also later hired by associates of Jeffrey Epstein to intimidate his victims from speaking out.
Really, no kidding. So let's move.
He was Clinton's FBI director.
Yeah, and then of course, Bill Clinton's on the Jeffrey Epstein flight logs 27 times, even though he said it was only 4. Right? Wasn't it 27 he showed up, or 32?
It's something like that. Well, some of them are multiple trips. So they show up on the flight logs multiple times because he was, for example, going on this big trip around Africa. And so there were multiple flights within that one broader trip, right? So sometimes it sounds kind of misleading, to say 27 because they were, part of the same long journey around different countries in Africa, but it was a significant amount of times. And I don't think Bill Clinton was telling the truth about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein at all. Actually, at that point in time, Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton had known each other for about a decade or so, which mainstream media seems uninclined and not interested in talking about at all. And Epstein was actually helping him set up the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And this is after more than a decade of Jeffrey Epstein being involved in the most controversial fundraisers in Clinton presidential history. Right after, and he began his involvement with Clinton fundraising right after his name was dropped from the case where he was named the mastermind of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. So he basically goes from being one of the a notorious financial criminal to becoming, a financial wizard for the Clinton family. And so that's why he was probably picked to set up what a lot of people refer to as the family's political slush fund, the Clinton Foundation.
So that's what that was. The Clinton Foundation was a way to keep, while they weren't in elected office.
It's pay to play politics with the Clintons.
Yes, exactly.
That's how they do it.
Yeah,
they turn cronyism into an art form and pay to play politics.
Yeah, and but Sam Harris will tell you nothing they've done compares to Trump University. Trump University is almost like a cartoon of a scandal compared to this shit. Right? Am I right?
Well, when you're looking at Epstein, to me, the relationship with the Clinton White House that Epstein had is much more damning than the Trump relationship in the 90s. So apparently the Epstein, depending on who you believe, right, the Epstein-Trump relationship fizzled out in the early 2000s over a botched real estate deal where they were both competing over a Palm Beach mansion they wanted to buy. But in the 90s, it seems like, you know, in the late 80s, Epstein and Trump were partying together and were very much part of the same social milieu. And then it seems like he helped arrange for Trump's two girlfriends in the 90s, one of whom he ended up marrying, Melania Trump. The first one was a woman named Selena Middelfart, who's a Norwegian heiress who actually accompanied Epstein on one of his 17 White House visits to the Clinton White House. And that was Trump's girlfriend before Melania. In my book, I talk about how, in my opinion, Jeffrey Epstein was involved in two parallel operations of sex trafficking. So there's the one that everyone knows about the underage exploited girls. But then there's these women that he invests in a lot of times when they're minors, but then funds their education and what have you over time and really like develops them as assets. And then he marries them off to his powerful friends. And so it seems like those two women, Selena Middelfart and depending on, again, who you believe, he's alleged to have introduced Trump to Melania Trump, that both of those were sort of arranged by him. So
tell me more about Jeffrey Epstein and his work with the government, like his ties with the CIA and stuff. Can you talk more about that?
Okay, so it's not just the CIA. Israeli intelligence plays a major role here, and I would argue in terms of the sexual blackmail activities, that's going to be Israeli intelligence above the CIA, but most likely sharing intelligence with the CIA. Yeah, but earlier on in the 1980s, in the early 80s, which is when it seems like he gets directly involved with intelligence, it appears to have been the CIA, and then he gets tied up with the Maxwells sometime in the late 80s or early 90s, and at that point, it seems to shift again.
Isn't Ghislaine Maxwell's father? Wasn't she in the Mossad?
Yeah, so Robert Maxwell was very much involved with Israeli intelligence, several scandals actually that are poorly explored but really should be. So for example, he sold software that had a backdoor for Israeli intelligence to two highly classified nuclear labs in the United States, Sandia and Los Alamos. And so all our nuclear secrets were stolen via espionage by the same the same guy who was handling Robert Maxwell in this case, Rafi Eitan. Rafi Eitan was also the handler of Jonathan Pollard, who was a big Israeli espionage scandal of the 1980s, because he was stealing a bunch of military secrets and giving it to Israel. Mm-hmm.
So that's a situation where Israel was spying on us, the United States.
Yes, and it actually has happened a lot, but. We can either talk about that or return to Epstein. I'm not sure what you're...
Let's return to Epstein.
Okay. So Epstein in the early 1980s, from the late 70s to the early 1980s, he's working at Bear Stearns. He has to leave Bear Stearns under, basically, it seems like a cloud of scandal. He was being investigated by the SEC over allegations that he was involved in insider trading that involved the Bronfman family company, Seagram's. And he appears to have been advised to leave his post at Bear Stearns. So at that point, he sort of enters this murky world where he claims he's either hiding or finding money for powerful people, looted money, so stolen money. So either he's helping financial criminals hide their loot, or he's helping the victims of financial criminals find what was stolen from them. So that should tell you right away that Jeffrey Epstein was an expert in shadow banking and illicit finance. His main clients allegedly during this time was Adnan Khashoggi. That's coming from a former business partner of his, Steve Hoffenberg, who's dead now, and Vicky Ward as well. And Adnan Khashoggi at this particular period of time was on the payroll of Israeli intelligence, involved with U.S. intelligence, Saudi intelligence, many intelligence agencies. But most importantly, he's one of the guys that in this exact period of time is setting into motion what later becomes known as Iran-Contra. So one of his main banks was called BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which was really much more than a bank. It was really a private intelligence apparatus that was set up by Pakistani intelligence with the involvement of the CIA. And that particular bank was actually involved itself in sex trafficking minors to the elites of the United Arab Emirates, including prepubescent kids. So it's very possible that Jeffrey Epstein learned that art from them. Or he learned it from Adnan Khashoggi, who used his yacht to sexually blackmail businessmen and politicians so they would buy weapons from him. So straight from the off, you have something not right here.
So let me ask you a quick question. How do powerful people not see this kind of stuff coming?
They're part of it.
Like, how do they allow themselves to get entrapped by someone in a sex thing like this?
Well, I think
there's a lot of them don't care, unfortunately.
After writing these books, that depending on the circle of powerful people you're talking about, this is kind of normal. This kind of depravity is kind of normal in some of these circles. In the other cases, it might be naivety. They don't expect to be entrapped at this party or have this filmed when they go somewhere and everyone else is doing it. So why don't I partake as well? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons.
Okay.
And another possible reason too is that I think that, intelligence agencies don't just blackmail people once they're in power. I think there are cases where they blackmail people who are unknown and then elevate them into positions of power. And that way they're controlled right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So then they can just partake as much as they want. Right.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go back to your Jeffrey Epstein timeline.
Yeah. So at the same time, Adnan Khashoggi hires Jeffrey Epstein as a client to do finance stuff for him. He hires Roy Cohn as a lawyer, and he hires Robert Keith Gray as his PR guy. Robert Keith Gray is the guy behind the Pageboy scandal we talked about earlier. And I just mentioned how Roy Cohn also had a longstanding involvement of sexual blackmail. And at this time, Roy Cohn is also best known as a mob lawyer. So it's very interesting. You have these people all swimming around Adnan Khashoggi. And the other interesting thing is that just before this, Roy Cohn and Robert Keith Gray had worked very closely with Bill Casey at the Reagan campaign. They worked directly under him. Bill Casey is CIA director at this point. But that was only about 2 months before Jeffrey Epstein left Bear Stearns. And before he was CIA director, Bill Casey was the lawyer for Bear Stearns. So that's kind of an interesting connection, because you have, legal trouble for Epstein at Bear Stearns. So it wouldn't necessarily have been Casey saying that he should go. It would have been whoever Casey put in charge of his legal portfolio while he's CIA director that would have told him that. And then he starts hanging around with all these, Casey associates involved in sexual blackmail. And then Adnan Khashoggi, who's the guy that is being used by Casey and others to set into motion Iran-Contra. And Iran-Contra a lot of times is misunderstood as just the arms for hostage crisis. But really what it was, in a broader sense, was Bill Casey was denied by Congress funding for sending weapons to the Contras. So he wanted to find a way to avoid ever having to ask Congress for money again, right? He wanted to find a way to make the black budget self-sustaining, so he didn't have to have congressional oversight of anything the CIA did ever again.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about the Contras, it was about finding rackets that would, feed money into the CIA so they could do whatever covert operation they wanted anywhere in the world. And so in Iran-Contra, that's why you've drug trafficking and arms trafficking being major revenues of income for that particular operation and the Contra support apparatus. And of course, there's a lot more going on there, but that's essentially the world that Jeffrey Epstein's stepping into in the 1980s to a significant degree. And then in the later 80s, he gets involved with Leslie Wexner, who's also tied to organized crime and a lot of other crazy stuff. And then Stephen Hoffenberg, with whom he plans this giant Ponzi scheme. And then, as I mentioned earlier, his name gets dropped from the case and he's going and hanging around the Clinton White House.
Wow. So and then he just, it's amazing. So he comes from Bears and Stearns. I didn't know Casey came from the former.
Well, he was the lawyer.
Yeah.
So he was, yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, it's really fascinating to me. It is fascinating, all these, and so he gets in. So then he's just pals with the president of that. He becomes pals with Bill Clinton. And now, and we all know the story from there, right? So that and then he just he's
Well,
getting
it's even weirder than that. So the first guy that invites Jeffrey Epstein to the White House is Robert Rubin. And Robert Rubin later becomes Treasury Secretary under
Yes.
Clinton, but at this point, he's director of the National Economic Council. But right before that, and this is in the beginning of 93, so Rubin had only been in that position for a couple months. Before that, he's the head of Goldman Sachs, which is the bank that was the biggest accessory, arguably, to Robert Maxwell's financial crimes, including the stealing of the pension money from the people that work at the Mirror Group and some of the media organizations that he ran.
And
right?
so
that's an
just-
interesting connection.
You're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell's father,
Yeah, Robert Maxwell.
Robert Maxwell. Okay. So
Who died in 1991 under odd circumstances
Yes.
again.
yeah, it seems like it seems like the Mossad killed him, right?
That's the that seems to be the case. Yes. Well, even Ghislaine Maxwell thinks that. She says it was rogue Mossad agents and Sicilian contract hitmen that killed her father. She doesn't believe her father died of suicide.
Yeah. Why is she allowed? So the big question people have about her is that how could she be? I don't think you have an answer, but how could she be convicted of child trafficking, sex trafficking, but there aren't any of her Johns? Where are the people she trafficked those kids to? Go ahead, Nancy.
They're not going to release it. Remember what I mentioned earlier about that client list they had that the girl that that slept with John F. Kennedy, and
Yes.
and the FBI's like, we don't need this. We're just gonna like light it on fire and get rid of it.
Yeah.
So the FBI is not there to investigate and hold the powerful to account.
Mhm.
They are there to cover up for their crimes and step on you, basically, the little people.
Okay, so
So they're not going to release it. I
right.
guess is my point. Because, and I don't think Ghislaine Maxwell's going to talk either, because she went from this dingy prison that Epstein, quote unquote, killed himself in. But now she's in country club prison in Florida doing yoga and having vegan Thanksgiving dinners and apparently having a grand old time.
Why do you think they didn't kill her, but they killed him?
You mean Epstein?
Yes, they killed Epstein.
Yeah,
Everyone knows
so
they did.
I think Ghislaine Maxwell, after what happened to not just her father, but also Epstein, was willing to keep her mouth shut to stay alive.
And he wasn't?
I think he was more a liability because he's not just involved in sex trafficking, right? He's involved in major financial crimes and a lot of other stuff.
Okay.
Ghislaine Maxwell is definitely much more focused on sex trafficking, though it seems like the whole Maxwell family, or her siblings, were very much involved in some crazy stuff with Microsoft and Bill Gates that I talk about in the book.
What's that?
So you may have heard the mainstream media narrative that Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates didn't meet each other until 2011, but
Yes.
that is a bunch of hooey because there's mainstream media articles from 2001 saying that Jeffrey Epstein made all his money from his business connections to three men. And those three men are, in this article, Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and the third one is Bill Gates. So how did Jeffrey Epstein make a bunch of money
with you? This is just like reiterating that I would love to talk to Winnie, because I haven't read that book or anything like that, but like we know so much of the same stuff, coming at it from completely different perspectives and angles and life experiences and academic backgrounds and careers and stuff like that. But it would be really nice to talk to her about this stuff.
Bill Gates, if he didn't by 2001, if he didn't meet him until for another decade, doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And then you start looking at this whole relationship, and it's very clear that there's no way that's true. A really good example is a woman named Melanie Walker, who was apparently supplied by Epstein to service Prince Andrew at Zorro Ranch on a couple of occasions. She was recruited by Epstein in 1992, allegedly as a Victoria's Secret model, but there's no evidence she ever actually modeled for Victoria's Secret. He apparently was funding her education, hires her as his science advisor in the late 90s. And then a couple of years after that, in the early 2000s, she becomes the science advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Cool. Also, I wonder if they know that I wonder if she knows that Kamala Harris, like her daughter, like she's done modeling and stuff like that for Balenciaga and other known rings, that do this, that allegedly do this, the human trafficking stuff like that as well, and the underage stuff. And you've seen or saw all the drama with it, with Kim Kardashian, I think it was, and Kanye, and representing that Balenciaga, and like the photos they had put online about like children, like children, like being tortured, and like this like satanic stuff, like weird stuff. And so even the vice president is supporting and enabling and cheating on her husband too, by the way, right? So as someone who has never cheated in my in my relationships, and who has been tempted by so many attractive men because of like where I worked. I was an infantry officer, one of one, like when I was going through, and now there's like a couple, and of great officers too, that these females I'm talking about. So I'm like, and so one of them I know, it's been many years since I've talked to her, but like she went to RMC with me. She was in the fourth year when I was in first year, and she was in the reserves and stuff like that. So she had only transferred and became a Patricia a couple of years after I was already a Patricia. And but if she would have went reg force, like she would have been the first. And so I always questioned why. Anyway, it is what it is. What was I going with this stuff? I don't even remember.
So if you're going to apply to be science advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and your CV says, my most recent experience is being the science advisor to Jeffrey Epstein, and you're Bill Gates hiring your top science advisor, you would have to know who Jeffrey Epstein is and what kind of science he's into. Right?
Yes. So Bill Gates in deep with Jeffrey Epstein and lying about it.
Yeah, but I think part of it's not just to protect Bill Gates, it's to protect Microsoft, because you also in the 90s have Jeffrey Epstein flying around on planes to official Microsoft functions in Russia, apparently giving women to the chief technology officer who was very close to Bill Gates named Nathan Myhrvold, a relationship with another top Microsoft executive named Linda Stone, who hired one of Epstein's entourage to be her secretary. All sorts of stuff going on there with Epstein and Microsoft. And it's not just Epstein, as I mentioned earlier, the Maxwells. Ghislaine Maxwell was very much invested in a company that was run by her twin sisters, Christine and Isabel, called the McKinley Group, or Magellan. It was one of the first search engines. They made an early deal with Microsoft in 1995. And it was Isabel Maxwell that made that deal specifically with Microsoft. There's this very weird article in The Guardian from 2000 where Isabel Maxwell, and I read, like, for the book, I read like maybe 30 interviews Isabel Maxwell has given over the years. And this is the only one where a journalist says she started purring and speaking in a fake Southern accent. And she does that when she talks about Bill Gates. Isn't that weird?
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is weird.
Yeah. It's weird. So, she must have known him pretty well. I wish I had the article in front of me so I could quote from it. It's very odd. But the other thing too is that at that time she was subsequently running a different company that was very much tied to the Israeli National Security State and the IDF, and that company was like hemorrhaging money, and its IPO was going to collapse. But it suddenly come the two Microsoft co-founders, Paul Allen and Bill Gates, and they pour a bunch of money into ComTouch and basically rescue it and then give it more money, even though it's never made a profit and doesn't really have a real product. And according to Isabel Maxwell, they put it on the map. So there's a lot of associations between the Maxwell family and Microsoft that should be looked at. And same with Epstein.
So
and
now,
they haven't been.
So now,
and even with like the World Health Organization, like who is their major and basically one of their only financial, providers, whatever you want to call it. Like it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's Bill Gates, and people need to look in this stuff more, or don't just brush it off and dismiss it. Okay, and start hiring people like Whitney Webb and myself to be, at the very least, the people that like share this information in person to friggin' people that are like elected officials. Like they need to friggin' know this information. Like they're literally a liability at this point.
What about so now I tell this story on stage in a joke about Alec Baldwin's name appears on the Jeffrey Epstein flight log, right? And that lady that he shot. Have you heard that rumor about what her next job was? So
I've heard the rumor, but I don't know if it was confirmed or not.
yeah, I haven't heard it confirmed. Okay, so let's not.
Oh, what about Whitney? I've been watching a lot of interviews. I was just on a plane watching a bunch of this. You brought up they're called the CIA of Wall Street, the Kroll Inc. or
Kroll
something.
Associates.
Yeah, I mean, because we know Nick Kroll, like that's his dad's company.
What?
Yeah, Nick Kroll's dad's
Nick
company.
Kroll's dad's?
Yeah. Mhm.
What about Nick Kroll's dad's company? What?
The CIA of Wall Street. It's called.
It's very sus.
His company is called
It's like
the CIA
U.S. and
of-
Israeli intelligence veterans coming together to be the CIA of Wall Street.
It's who Weinstein hired to go check on his accusers, like erased. It's crazy,
No
dude.
kidding.
Yep.
I also have a question. Like, what are your thoughts on anyone watching on being called a multinational or having multinationals as elected members of parliament, or people that are like premiers or mayors of towns and communities and stuff like that, being multinationals? So people that have affiliations are aligned to multiple, countries or corporations within, within multiple countries. I just that being a nationalist, there's a lot of negative connotations regarding it. But I believe that if there's actually people that are nationalists, they have their own country. They're aligned with one country, and the well-being of that country, as they should be, because you can only manage like a certain amount of a population in a region effectively. And you need to have people that are aligned with that country and are not people that could be that have like interests, and like interests and ties and or links and or like more loyalty. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. More loyalty towards other countries than the ones that they're serving within and getting our taxpayers' money, right? So they're like these bodies of governance, like these are put in place by us. Okay, we're giving money and it's supposed to go towards things like roads. Okay, so start doing more of that because the roads now are getting a lot more shittier, and infrastructure and for some social welfare programs, right? Like not to the degree that they're at now. Okay, and not exploiting the members and stealing this money and giving it to other nationals. And so anyway, I just wanted to put that out there and not say too much about that because this video is already running quite long.
What's the name of the company? The CIA of Wall Street?
Kroll Associates. Jules Kroll is the guy that created it. Mhm.
Nick is a boy, Ghislaine Maxwell. Is that what we're saying?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Wow.
Well,
It's
wow.
tied to improv. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Do you remember when that judge was shot? She was going to look into that case. She
Yes.
was going to rule
Yeah.
over
Yes,
that
I
case
do.
of Deutsche. Yeah. So the guy that allegedly did a hit on her home is an ex-Kroll Associates employee. Kroll Associates is also the firm that Robert Maxwell hired right before his death.
Nice.
And a whole bunch of other stuff. They did security at the World Trade Center when 9/11 happened, all sorts of stuff with Kroll Associates. It's quite a ride
One more thing.
to investigate them.
Ron Brown.
One of the guys that helped set them up was part of that sexual blackmail operation about John F. Kennedy I mentioned earlier, Tom Corbally, who was tied to organized crime in the U.S. and then went over to Britain and did stuff over there. He was also hanging out with Heidi Fleiss, the Hollywood Madam. Yeah.
I watched a clip of when you talk about Ron Brown because I got like a stupid random memory, right? And I remember Ron Brown, the guy that died like back. I can't remember what was George W. and all this, but you were talking about Ron Brown's mysterious death. I was like, is this the same? You said he looked like Lando, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that is him. So Kyle Dunnigan, my buddy I make comedy videos with, his dad was the lawyer who had the big case against the faulty navigational system. And my friend's dad was the lawyer that sued
Wow.
for that supposedly faulty navigational system. And
Yeah, the guy that was at the airport in Croatia that was supposedly partly responsible for the navigation error was found 2 days later after that plane crash with a gun wound to the chest, and it was ruled as suicide.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
So,
Ron Goldman?
sorry, I should go back. Yeah,
Yeah,
so let's go back to the Clinton White House Epstein visits for a second, so I can explain where Ron Brown fits into all of this. But before I start, Ron Brown was Clinton's Secretary of Commerce,
Okay.
right? So we'll start there. So Jeffrey Epstein, I mentioned his first meeting was with Robert Rubin. His second meetings in 1993 were around this fundraiser that makes an appearance in Vince Foster's suicide note, among other things. And then after that, Jeffrey Epstein has 15 meetings in about a year with a guy named Mark Middleton. Mark Middleton died earlier this year with an extension cord around his neck and a shotgun wound to the chest in Little Rock, Arkansas, which ruled a suicide.
Well, he must have been depressed.
He wanted to make sure he died.
Well, here's the other thing. Mark Middleton was so scandalous for what he was doing at the same time Jeffrey Epstein was meeting with him that he was being investigated by Congress. And the only reason that investigation never finished is because the first time George W. Bush, the subsequent president, invoked executive privilege was to keep documents about Mark Middleton from being made available to Congress. Mark Middleton was not a big fish, you would think, at the White House. He was just an aide to the chief of staff to Bill Clinton. So what was going on with Mark Middleton there? Well, it's mostly remembered as this scandal in 1996 called the campaign finance scandal of 96, related to the fundraising of the DNC for Clinton's re-election campaign. But a lot of what was going on is that foreign citizens were laundering campaign contributions, filling DNC coffers, but a lot of it was targeting Ron Brown. And a lot of what was going on there were efforts to change Commerce Department policy so that a lot of very sensitive military technology could be sent to adversary nations when that was normally not allowed. And some of the people at the center of this were people like Lockheed Martin CEOs, who actually later goes on to create In-Q-Tel for the CIA. And you have a guy named Bernard Schwartz that used to run Laurel Space. He was one of Biden's biggest donors in 2020. And so basically you have this influence, this huge effort to undermine the Commerce Department and buy off Ron Brown. And Ron Brown, at some point, as all of this kept going on, pieces of it began to unravel, and he agreed to cooperate with investigators. Not long after that, he was unexpectedly invited to go on a trade mission to Croatia, and the plane crashes
Like Goodfellas.
because of supposedly because of an aging navigational system. Yeah, everyone on the plane dies except for a flight attendant that apparently walked away, but then when she arrived at the hospital in a military helicopter, she was at an arrival with a broken neck. And Ron Brown's body was so odd when it was discovered that people in Congress called for it to be investigated because he appeared to have a bullet wound in his skull, not caused by a plane crash. But it wasn't just Ron Brown. You had like 34 or so other people on the plane, and they were all part of the same, the ITA at the Commerce Department, which was the most infiltrated by this broader campaign finance scandal.
Chinagate?
That was really.
Was it? Was it called Chinagate?
Well, so conservatives call it Chinagate, but I would say that's a misnomer.
Oh.
So it involved a lot of China stuff, but the family that was really behind it were the Riyadi family, and they were based in Indonesia. And the Riyadi family were business partners and longtime associates of a guy named Jackson Stevens, who basically bankrolled and was largely responsible for the Clinton family's rise to power, when Bill Clinton became governor of Arkansas and so on. And he was intimately involved, and a lot of his companies were involved in things like Iran-Contra, the Promise software scandal, a lot of major espionage activity that's also tied to crime, and of course, Clinton-era cronyism in the 80s and beyond. And so the Riyadi family sort of, they were also very tied up with BCCI, the same bank that Epstein was apparently working with.
It's like a big happy family, dude.
Yeah, but BCCI collapsed in 1991, and so there were efforts after that by the same network to find replacements, and I think that's sort of what Chinagate ended up being about.
Well, listen, this is all fascinating, and I wish we had more time to talk to you today. We're going to have to bring you back on because I can tell there's a lot more stuff to talk about.
Jimmy, put me on the show too. It'd be great. So, long video again, but I hope it was entertaining. You're not going to get this much information, especially this degree of like variation, I think, anywhere else. So I will leave it at that. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.